Steve Harvey LAUGHS, until he hears the real story you think you know someone by looking at them. You see the smile on their face, and you assume they are happy. You hear the laughter in their voice, and you assume everything is fine. But what if the happiest-looking person in the room is the one carrying the heaviest burden? What if the laughter is the only thing holding them together? On a Wednesday afternoon in March 2025, a 63-year-old man walked onto the Family Feud stage and made Steve Harvey laugh harder than he had laughed in weeks. The man was charming, quick-witted, and had the kind of effortless humor that made everyone around him feel good. Steve was grinning from ear to ear. The audience was in stitches. Everything felt joyful and light. And then, in the middle of a question about family, this man said something that made Steve Harvey's laughter die in his throat. The smile vanished. The studio went silent. And the real story, the one hiding behind all that laughter, turned out to be something so heartbreaking, so selfless, and so quietly heroic that Steve Harvey stood on his own stage and told this man he was the greatest person he had ever met. Before we go any further, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. What this man was hiding behind his smile is going to change the way you look at every person you meet today. The Ellis family from Mobile, Alabama walked onto the Family Feud stage and immediately owned the room. Their matching emerald green shirts were crisp. Their energy was warm and infectious. And from the very first second, it was clear that the man standing at the front of the line was the source of all that energy. His name was James Ellis, and the moment he shook Steve Harvey's hand, you could tell this was a man who had spent his entire life making other people feel comfortable, welcome, and happy. He was 63 years old, and he had the kind of presence that made a room feel smaller and warmer the moment he entered it. James was a retired postal carrier who had walked the same mail route in Mobile for 31 years. He retired 2 years earlier, and his neighbors on the route had thrown him a block party that lasted until midnight, because that was the kind of impact James Ellis had on the people around him. He was not just the mailman. He was the man who checked on elderly residents when he had not seen them in a few days. He was the man who kept dog treats in his bag for every pet on the block and knew each one by name. He was the man who shoveled driveways in winter for people who could not do it themselves, even though it was not part of his job and nobody asked him to. He was the man who, on his last day of work, walked the route one final time and found a handwritten card in every single mailbox thanking him for 3 decades of kindness. He kept every card in a shoebox under his bed. James's humor was legendary. He had the timing of a professional comedian and the delivery of a man who had spent 31 years perfecting his material one front porch at a time. He could make a stranger laugh within 30 seconds of meeting them. He could turn a bad day into a good one with a single sentence. His family said that James had never had a bad day in his life, which was not true, but he had never let anyone else see one, and to the people around him, the effect was the same. Standing next to James was his daughter, Tamika, who was 37 and worked as a middle school principal. Tamika was the family organizer, the one who planned every holiday, coordinated every gathering, and made sure everyone was where they needed to be. She had inherited her father's warmth but expressed it differently. Where James used humor, Tamika used structure. She built systems of care around the people she loved, making sure that needs were met and nobody slipped through the cracks. She ran her school the same way she ran her family, with precision, compassion, and an open-door policy that every student and teacher knew was genuine. Next to Tamika was James's son, Andre, who was 34 and worked as a long-haul truck driver. Andre was the quiet one, the observer, the family member who said the least but noticed the most. He had his father's physical build, tall and solid, but not his father's social ease. Andre was content to stand in the background while James held court. He preferred it that way. His contribution to the family was not in words but in presence. He showed up. Every birthday, every holiday, every crisis, every ordinary Tuesday, Andre showed up. And in a family as vibrant as the Ellises, the steady, reliable son who never missed anything was more essential than anyone realized. The fourth member was James's younger sister, Dorothy, who was 59 and worked as a church secretary. Dorothy was the family's spiritual center, the woman who organized prayer chains and cooked meals for families in mourning, and sat with people in hospital waiting rooms because she believed that nobody should receive bad news alone. Dorothy and James were close in the way that siblings who grew up poor in the rural South were close, bonded by shared scarcity, and the understanding that the only wealth that mattered was the people who would answer the phone at 2 in the morning. The fifth member of the team was James's best friend, Henry, who was 65 and retired from the Alabama Department of Transportation. Henry and James had been friends since the 7th grade. They had played football together in high school, stood in each other's weddings, and raised their children on the same street. Henry was the only person alive who knew the full truth about James Ellis, the truth that James had been hiding from his family for 9 months, the truth that was the real reason they were standing on the Family Feud stage today, even though not a single member of the family except Henry knew it. James had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer 9 months earlier. The cancer had been caught late, too late for surgery, too late for aggressive treatment, too late for anything except the slow, private business of preparing to leave the world. James's oncologist had given him 12 to 18 months. He had chosen not to tell his family, not yet, not until he had done everything he needed to do. And one of the things he needed to do, the thing he needed to do most of all, was give his family one perfect day together, a day they could remember forever. A day so full of laughter and love and joy that it would be strong enough to hold them up when the truth finally came out. Family Feud was that day. Henry knew. He had been with James at the doctor's appointment. He had held James's hand in the parking lot while James sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel for 20 minutes without speaking. He had driven James home that night because James could not see through his tears. And he had kept the secret for 9 months because James had asked him to, and because Henry understood that James was not hiding from death. He was buying time, time to set his house in order, time to make sure his children were prepared, time to create one last set of memories that would outlive him. The Ellis family was facing off against the Perkins family from Tuscaloosa. The Perkins were a lovely family, energetic and competitive, exactly the kind of opponents that made for great television. Steve Harvey came out and immediately connected with James. The two men fell into an easy, natural banter that had the audience laughing before the first question was asked. James told Steve a story about his male root that was so funny Steve had to hold onto the podium to keep from falling over. "Where have you been all my life?" Steve said, wiping his eyes. "I need you on this show every week." James grinned and said, "Mr. Harvey, I have been delivering mail for 31 years. I have 31 years of stories. You do not have enough episodes." The audience loved him. Steve loved him. Everyone in that building felt better for being in the same room as James Ellis. And none of them had any idea that the funniest man in the room was dying. The game was a masterclass in family chemistry. The Ellis family played with a joy that was so genuine it elevated every round. James was spectacular, giving quick, clever answers that landed on the board almost every time, and delivering each one with a comedic flourish that made Steve shake his head in amazement. Tamika was sharp and strategic. Andre, despite his quiet nature, stepped up to the podium twice and gave #1 answers both times, earning surprised applause from the audience and a proud nod from his father. Dorothy contributed a heartfelt answer in one round that made the audience say, "Aw," in unison, and James leaned over and whispered, "That is my baby sister. She has been making people say aw since 1966. Steve Harvey was having one of the best times he had ever had hosting the show. The rapport between him and James was extraordinary, the kind of natural chemistry between two men who understood comedy and humanity in the same way. During one break, Steve told a producer off microphone, "This is the guy. This is the one I am going to remember." He did not know how right he was. By the 5th round, the Ellises had built a commanding lead. The audience was firmly behind them. The energy in the studio was the highest it had been all week. And James was still performing at peak capacity, telling jokes, making faces, keeping the room alive with the relentless generosity of a man who understood that laughter was the most valuable thing he could give to the people he loved, and that his time for giving it was running out. Then Steve read the question that opened the door. "We surveyed 100 people. Name something a parent wants to make sure they do before they die." It was meant to be a reflective question, the kind that produced answers like see their kids graduate or travel the world or pay off the house. It was James's turn at the podium. James stepped up, and for the first time all day his comedic energy flickered. It was barely perceptible. A pause half a second longer than his usual beat. A slight shift in his posture. The almost invisible adjustment of a man who has just been hit with the reality of his own situation by a question he was not prepared for. Steve noticed the pause but read it as thinking time, nothing unusual. James looked at the board, then at Steve, and said with a smile that was technically perfect but somehow different from every other smile he had given that day, "Make sure my kids know how to laugh without me." The answer landed on the board. Number 4, 12 points. The audience clapped. Steve nodded approvingly. "That is a good answer," he said, already looking at his card for the next question. James walked back to his family, and Dorothy touched his arm briefly as he passed, a gesture so small it could have meant anything. But Henry saw it. And Henry saw something else too. He saw James blink rapidly 4 times in a row, the same way he had blinked in the parking lot 9 months ago. The same way a man blinks when he is forcing tears back behind a wall that is getting thinner every day. The game continued. 2 more rounds played out without incident. James was funny. The family was great. The audience was happy. Everything was on track for a perfect episode. Then came a question in the final round. Name something you want your family to remember about you. It was Tamika's turn. She gave a solid answer. Andre gave another. Then it came back to James for the steal opportunity. He needed one correct answer to win the round. Steve read the question one more time. Something you want your family to remember about you. James looked at Steve. Then he turned and looked at his family. Tamika, Andre, Dorothy. He looked at each of them the way a man looks at the people he loves when he knows something they do not. When he is memorizing their faces not because he might forget, but because he will not be there to see them much longer. The look lasted about 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds the performance wavered. James turned back to the microphone and said, in a voice that was still warm but no longer performing, that I was here, that I was right here, and that every single day I had with them was the best day of my life. The board lit up. It was a match. The Ellis family won the round. The audience cheered, but Steve Harvey did not move on. He stood behind his podium, holding his card, and looked at James with the expression of a man who had just heard something that did not match the performance. Something too real, too heavy, too final. Steve had been laughing with this man for an hour, and in a single sentence the laughter had been replaced by something that Steve's instincts told him was much, much bigger than a game show answer. James, Steve said slowly, that was a beautiful answer, but can I ask you something? James nodded. His smile was still there, but it was working harder now. You said every day with your family was the best day of your life. Most people say something like my sense of humor or my hard work. You said you wanted them to remember that you were here. That is a very specific thing to say. Steve paused. Why is it so important that they remember you were here? The studio got quieter, not silent yet, but quieter. The audience felt the shift without understanding it. Tamika tilted her head slightly, watching her father with the focus of a woman who ran a school full of adolescents and had learned to recognize when someone was hiding something important behind a casual exterior. James opened his mouth. The joke was right there. The deflection was ready. He had been doing this for 63 years, turning every heavy moment into a light one, converting pain into punchlines so efficiently that nobody ever thought to question the exchange rate. The joke was right there on the tip of his tongue, and for the first time in 9 months he could not make himself say it. James looked at Henry. Henry was standing at the end of the podium, and his face was doing what Henry's face always did when the weight of the secret became too much. It was crumpling, slowly, quietly, like a piece of paper being crushed by an invisible hand. Henry's eyes were wet, and he gave James the smallest nod imaginable, a nod that said, "It is okay, if you need to." "It is okay." James turned back to Steve, and the smile fell away, not all at once, in stages, like curtains being drawn back from a window, one layer at a time, revealing what had been behind them all along. First, the performance disappeared, then the bravery, then the wall he had built between himself and the truth. And what was left was a 63-year-old man standing on a game show stage, looking at a host he had met an hour ago, and deciding whether to say out loud the thing he had been carrying in silence for 9 months. "Mr. Harvey," James said, and his voice was different now. It was the voice underneath all the jokes, the voice he used when he prayed alone in his car before walking into the cancer clinic. The voice he used when he recorded messages on his phone at 3 in the morning for his children to find after he was gone. "I have not been honest with you today. I have not been honest with anyone today, except Henry." He looked at his children, Tamika, Andre, Dorothy. They were watching him with the dawning awareness that something was shifting, that the ground they were standing on was about to move. "I need to tell you something, and I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I am sorry I waited until we were standing on this stage, but I needed today first. I needed to give you today before I gave you the truth." Steve Harvey was standing very still. The laughter from an hour ago was a distant memory. In its place was the quiet attention of a man who understood that what was coming next was going to be the most important thing that happened on his stage that year. James looked at his children one more time and said, 9 months ago I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It is terminal. The doctors say I have a few more months, maybe more, maybe less." His voice broke on the word less, but he forced himself forward. "I did not tell you because I did not want your last memories of me to be about hospitals and treatments and sadness. I wanted your last memories to be about laughter, about us, about today. That is why we are here. That is why I brought us to Family Feud, Because I wanted one perfect day with my family where the only thing anyone felt was joy. The studio collapsed into silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something so heavy that sound cannot exist alongside it. Tamika's hand flew to her mouth. Andre took one step forward and then stopped, his body rigid, his face breaking apart in real time. Dorothy closed her eyes and grabbed the podium as if the floor had tilted beneath her. And Steve Harvey, the man who had been laughing harder than he had laughed in weeks just minutes ago, stood behind his podium and did not move, did not speak, did not breathe, it seemed. He just stared at James Ellis with an expression that held every emotion a human face can hold simultaneously. Tamika moved first. She crossed the distance between her and her father in 2 steps and threw her arms around him with a force that nearly knocked him off balance. "Daddy, why?" she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Why did you not tell us?" James held his daughter and said, "Because you would have canceled the trip, you would have canceled everything. You would have wrapped me in cotton and started grieving before I was gone. And I did not want that. I wanted this. I wanted today. I wanted to see you laugh. I wanted to watch Andre give 2 number-1 answers and be proud of himself. I wanted to hear Dorothy make the audience say aw. I wanted to stand next to Steve Harvey and make him laugh so hard he grabbed the podium. I wanted one day where cancer did not exist. One day where I was just your daddy and we were just a family having the best time of our lives." Andre was standing 2 feet away, and his body was shaking. The quiet, steady son who showed up for everything and never asked for recognition was shaking from head to foot, fighting a war between composure and collapse. James reached out his free hand and Andre took it, and the contact broke whatever was holding Andre together. He bent forward and pressed his face against his father's hand and wept. Not silently, loudly. The raw, unchained sound of a man who had just learned he was going to lose the person he had modeled his entire life on. Dorothy had not moved. She was standing at the podium with her eyes closed and her hands folded in front of her chest, and her lips were moving in the prayer she always whispered when the world broke open. She knew prayer would not fix this. She was not praying for a miracle. She was praying for the strength to walk to her brother without her legs giving out. When she opened her eyes, she walked to James and took his face in both of her hands and looked at him with 59 years of shared history, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner, every funeral and wedding and hospital visit and 2 in the morning phone call, and she said, "James Michael Ellis, you are the most stubborn, ridiculous, beautiful man God ever made, and I am furious with you, and I love you so much it is going to kill me." James laughed. Even now, even in this moment, he laughed. It was not the big, performative laugh from earlier. It was a small, wet, broken laugh that came from the place where grief and love occupied the same space. "Dot, you have been furious with me since 1968. I am used to it." Dorothy laughed too, and the sound of brother and sister laughing together while the world fell apart around them was one of the most human sounds that studio had ever held. Henry had moved to the side of the stage, giving the family their space. But James called him forward. "Come here, old man. You have been keeping my secret for 9 months. You deserve to stand with us." Henry walked to his friend and placed his hand on James's shoulder. He did not speak. He did not need to. 52 years of friendship said everything. Steve Harvey had been standing in the same spot, watching this family hold each other for nearly 3 minutes. The tears on his face had been flowing continuously, and he had made no effort to stop them. When he finally spoke, his voice was something the audience had never heard. It was not the voice of a host. It was not the voice of a comedian. It was not even the voice of a public speaker. It was the voice of a man who had been profoundly moved by another man's love. "James," Steve said, and the word came out like it weighed 100 pounds. "You walked onto this stage today knowing what you know. You played this game. You told jokes. You made me laugh harder than I have laughed in months. And the entire time, you were giving your family a gift. Not the $20,000, not the game show experience. You were giving them a memory. A perfect, untouchable memory of their father at his best, doing what he does better than anyone I have ever met, making the people he loves happy." Steve paused and took a shuddering breath. "I have been doing this show for a long time. I have met thousands of families. And I can tell you that what you did today is the single most selfless thing I have ever witnessed. Most people, when they get the kind of news you got, they stop living. They become the diagnosis. They become the patient. They let the disease define whatever time they have left. You did the opposite. You decided that your last months on this earth were going to be about giving, not receiving. About joy, not sorrow. About making sure that when your children think of you, the first thing they remember is not how you died, but how you lived." Steve walked to James and embraced him. Not the quick, one-armed hug that television hosts give contestants. A real, full, sustained embrace between 2 men who understood something about life that most people only learn when it is too late. James held on, and for the first time all day, he was not the one doing the holding. He was being held. And the relief on his face, the visible, physical release of 9 months of carrying a terminal diagnosis alone so that his family could have one more day of peace, was something that everyone in that studio would carry with them forever. Steve pulled back and looked at James. "You said you wanted your family to remember that you were here. James, I promise you, after today, there is not a person in this building, and there will not be a person who watches this episode who will ever forget that James Ellis was here." The audience gave a standing ovation. It lasted over 4 minutes. Nobody sat down. Nobody left. They stood and they clapped and they cried and they honored a man who had walked onto a game show stage to die a little more slowly and love a little more loudly, and who had somehow, in the process, reminded 200 strangers what it meant to be alive. The Ellis family played fast money and won the $20,000. James and Tamika combined for 219 points, one of the highest totals of the season. James gave 4 top 2 answers and delivered every one of them with the same quick wit and warm delivery that had defined his performance all day. When the final score was revealed, James turned to his children and said, "See, I told you today was going to be the best day." Tamika laughed and cried at the same time, the way people do when their hearts are too full for one emotion to handle. Steve Harvey made an announcement before the family left the stage. His foundation would be covering the costs of a family vacation for the Ellises, anywhere they wanted to go, fully arranged and medically supported so James could travel safely. He also announced that the show would create a professionally produced highlight reel of the family's best moments from the taping, a video they could keep forever. And he pledged a personal donation to the Pancreatic Cancer Research Foundation in James's name. This man gave 31 years to a male route and made every person on that route feel like they mattered, Steve said. He deserves to have his fight against this disease supported by people who feel the same way. When the episode aired 8 weeks later, it became the most watched Family Feud episode in 3 years and the most shared clip in the show's history. The moment when Steve Harvey's laughter turned to silence was viewed over 130 million times across all platforms. But it was not the shock of the reveal that made people share it. It was what came before and after. It was watching a man be genuinely, brilliantly, selflessly funny while knowing what he was hiding. It was watching his children learn the truth and choosing love over anger. It was watching Steve Harvey, the man who always had something to say, stand in silence because he had just met someone whose love was bigger than language. The response from the cancer community was massive. Pancreatic cancer organizations reported a significant increase in awareness, donations, and screening inquiries in the weeks following the episode. James's story became a touchpoint for conversations about how people choose to spend their remaining time when a terminal diagnosis removes the luxury of assuming there will always be more. Hospice workers and palliative care specialists began referencing the episode in patient conversations, using James's approach, prioritizing joy and memory-making over clinical resignation, as an example of what end-of-life agency could look like. The Ellis family took their vacation. They went to the Gulf Coast, to a house on the beach in Gulf Shores, Alabama, close enough to home that the trip did not exhaust James, but far enough away that the world felt different. For 6 days, the family lived on the beach. James sat in a chair near the water and watched his grandchildren build sandcastles. Tamika cooked her father's favorite meals every night in the beach house kitchen. Andre sat next to his father for hours without speaking, the two of them watching the ocean with the comfortable silence of men who did not need words to be together. Dorothy organized evening prayer circles on the porch that the whole family attended, even Henry, who drove down from Mobile every evening to sit with his friend. And on the last night of the trip, James gathered everyone together and told them stories. Stories about their mother, who had passed away 8 years earlier. Stories about his childhood with Dorothy. Stories about his male route and the people he had loved along the way. He talked until midnight, and nobody interrupted him, and nobody checked their phone, and nobody left. They just sat and listened to a man who understood that stories were the most durable thing a person could leave behind. Steve Harvey featured the Ellis family on his talk show 4 months after the episode aired. James walked onto the set slowly, leaning on a cane that Henry had carved for him from a piece of Alabama pine, and the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted so long the producers had to ask people to sit down so the segment could begin. James looked thinner than he had on the Family Feud stage. His movements were more deliberate, but his eyes were the same. Bright, warm and alive with the unmistakable spark of a man who was using every day he had left the way it was supposed to be used. Steve asked James how he was doing, and James answered the way James always answered. "Steve, I am having the time of my life. I wake up every morning and I think I get another day. I get another sunrise. I get another cup of coffee. I get another phone call from Tamika telling me I am being impossible. I get another text from Andre that is just a fishing emoji because that boy still does not know how to express emotions with words." The audience laughed. James grinned. And for a moment, the magic was back. The same magic that had filled the Family Feud studio months earlier. The magic of a man who turned every room he entered into a better place. Then Steve asked the question that changed the air. "James, do you have any regrets about keeping the diagnosis from your family for 9 months?" James was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was so unusual for him that it told the audience more than any words could have. "I regret the weight I put on Henry," James said, looking at his friend who was sitting in the front row. "Keeping a secret like that takes a toll, and I asked him to carry it because I was not strong enough to carry it alone and not ready to share it with my children. Henry did that for me. He carried my secret and my fear and my grief on top of his own for 9 months. That is a debt I cannot repay." Henry from the front row shook his head and said, loud enough for the microphone to catch, "You already repaid it, James. You repaid it 52 years ago when you gave a scared kid half your lunch on the first day of 7th grade. Everything after that has been interest." The audience broke. Steve broke. James looked at his best friend and laughed the real laugh, the small, broken, beautiful one, and said, "Henry, I swear you have had that line prepared for months." Henry shrugged. "I have been taking notes from the best." James looked at the cameras and said something that would be quoted in eulogies and graduation speeches and wedding toasts for years to come. "People say that when you find out you are dying, everything changes. That is not true. Nothing changes. The sun still comes up. The coffee still tastes good. Your children still need you. Your friends still make you laugh. The world keeps turning and you are still in it. The only thing that changes is that you stop wasting time. You stop putting off the phone call. You stop saving the good china for a special occasion. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to tell someone you love them because you finally understand that every moment is the perfect moment. You were just too busy to notice before." Steve Harvey sat in his chair and let those words settle over the studio. Then he said, "James Ellis, I laughed with you on my stage for an hour before I knew the truth. And I want you to know that the laughter was not diminished by the truth. It was made sacred by it, because you were not laughing to avoid the pain. You were laughing because you understood something that most people never learn. Joy and sorrow are not opposites. They are neighbors. They live in the same house. And the people who know that, the people who can hold both at the same time, those are the people who know what it means to be alive." James Ellis passed away 7 months after the Family Feud taping, at home in Mobile, Alabama, surrounded by his family. He was 64 years old. Tamika was holding his right hand. Andre was holding his left. Dorothy was in the chair by the window, her lips moving in the prayer she had been whispering since she was a girl. And Henry was sitting at the foot of the bed, his hand resting on his friend's ankle, the last physical connection between two men who had shared 52 years and one secret that had cost them both everything and nothing. The Family Feud highlight reel played at James's funeral. The church was so full that people stood along the walls and in the hallway. The video showed James grinning at the podium, making Steve Harvey grab the podium in laughter, dancing after a correct answer, holding his children after the truth came out, and sitting on the beach during the family vacation with the Gulf Coast sunset behind him. The last frame was a photo that Tamika had taken during the taping without James knowing. In it, James was looking at his children with an expression that was not a smile and not a performance and not a joke. It was pure, unfiltered, undisguised love, the kind of love that a man shows when he believes nobody is watching, the kind of love that exists only when every mask has been removed and every wall has been taken down. Steve Harvey attended the funeral. He sat in the third row and did not speak publicly, but afterward he found Tamika in the parking lot and said something to her that she later shared in an interview. He said, "Your father walked onto my stage and made me laugh. Then he made me cry. Then he made me think about what I am doing with my own time and whether I am using it the way it deserves to be used. I have met thousands of people in my career. I have forgotten most of them. I will never forget your father, not because of what he was facing, but because of what he did with what he had left. He chose joy. He chose family. And he chose to go out laughing. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen." The shoebox under James's bed, the one containing every thank you card from his mail route, was found by Andre after the funeral. Inside, along with the cards from his neighbors, was a single sealed envelope with "For my family" written on the front in James's handwriting. Inside was a letter. It read, "If you are reading this, then I am gone and you have found my treasure box. These cards are from people whose mail I delivered and whose lives I walked through for 31 years. I kept them because they reminded me that small kindnesses matter, that showing up matters, that remembering someone's dog's name matters. I did not change the world, I walked a route. But I walked it with love, and these cards are proof that the love was received. My dearest children, walk your own routes. Whatever they are, walk them with love. Be kind to the people you pass. Remember their names. Carry treats for their dogs. And when your route is over, I hope you find a shoebox full of proof that you were here and that your being here mattered. I love you. I was always right here. And in every kindness you show to a stranger, I always will be. Daddy." If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Leave a comment below and tell someone you love that you see them right now today. Share this video with every person you know because James Ellis was right. Every moment is the perfect moment. You were just too busy to notice before. We will see you in the next one.